Hello and welcome to another special Monday YouTube Showdown show. I, of course, am Adam Levitan here from Establish and Run. I am joined by Mike Leone, King of the Thunderdome, King of the Jerseys, even has a Chicago jersey for the Bears game tonight. Leone, what's going on?
Yeah, I couldn't find any Vikings-Bears stuff, so I had to rock the Michael Jordan old school jersey. But I think it's, we generally recap the yesterday's slate, and it was pretty crazy slate, Adam. I think it was one of the lower scoring slates I ever remember. I mean, we had some late action in the Bills-Arizona game, or you could have had GPP scores that were legitimately winning at 140-ish, 130.
So what we're gonna do on today's show, we're going to quickly recap what happened yesterday. We're gonna get into this showdown slate, which is just, it's amazing. Every showdown slate is just an utter mess from an injury perspective, it seems. And we'll get through it like that. Let's start with yesterday. And I think one of the key points from yesterday is it is a GPP player's dream, an optimal GPP player's dream, to have three running backs take up over 100% of ownership. In other words, Aaron Jones, Mike Davis, Duke Johnson, the first two over 40%, Duke Johnson over 25%, and stuff like the Million Maker even higher and stuff, I'm sure. Like you see Mike Davis 96% in the Thunderdome here in small field stuff. And so what happens is you get situations where you can fade one or two or even, God forbid, three of those guys. And if they fail, and the chances of all three of them failing was very low, but in the event that they fail, well, you no longer have to beat 1,000 people or however many people are in your contest. You only have to beat 600 of them. And so immediately you get huge leaps up on the field. Generally speaking, Leone, what do you think about how ownership condensed yesterday and how you thought about it?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Sometimes I get feedback on my lineups in small field tournaments. People are like, don't you think that was too contrarian? Whereas yesterday, no one had that feedback. If anything, the feedback was maybe you should have faded Mike Davis too, because I locked Mike Davis. But I think these are the slates that you want to be aggressive and you want to win these lower scoring slates. The higher scoring slates generally means the chalk is going off and you need the perfect lineup. I want to be able to win on slates where some things go wrong. And it's tough when a guy like Dalvin Cook 2 weeks ago goes off, you just feel like you always have to play the chalk. And but then a week later, and not only did the running backs fail, Adam, but my goodness, the receiver performances, Keenan Allen, Michael Thomas, who I had in this lineup in the Thunderdome, DK Metcalf, across the board, it was failure. So I think it's definitely wise to take some chances, even in smaller field tournaments. And one thing we talked through on our morning show on Wake and Rake was with all the late swap options, you'll try and do something contrarian early, because if you hit on it, you can kind of chalkify your lineup. And if you don't, you still have outs because you can go contrarian late. And that was a strategy that worked with me, where I played a lot of Swift with one of the Washington guys, either McFarland or Gibson. And because that hit and Aaron Jones and Duke Johnson failed, I was able to stick with relatively chalky Allen Diggs stacks with Arizona stuff. I had one in a different tournament that was similar to this, but instead of McLaurin, I had Gibson, and it was, an Allen, the obvious double stack with Diggs and John Brown, and bringing DeAndre Hopkins back. And it was able to get to the top of lineups. And I was able to stick with that chalk because I took those contrarian chances early and had that information ahead of time to allow me to make the decisions.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the key point is, like, if you just play enough, you realize that when you play Dalvin Cook at 35% in tournaments and he goes off, well, that's great, but did you actually win any money? Whereas the difference here is that if you don't play them and they fail, you have a chance to really get to the top quickly here. I also had a similar lineup to what you're showing here a little bit. I had Kyler single stacked with Hopkins and bring it back with Diggs, which ended up being one of my better GPP lineups of the year. Shout out to you guys for being on the Swift McLaurin stuff. I played that, which was really good too. But yeah, I thought it was an interesting slate. And again, I kind of a course in what you look for in tournaments. And unfortunately, we won't get that late swap stuff as often, because a lot of times in the 4 p.m. slate, there's only 3 games, there's only 2 games, there's only 4 games. It's not the same type of situation. This was so unique, whereas all the chalk running backs were early, and then like the shootout games in good weather were all late. Like, it was just so unique.
Yeah, and it was also unique in the amount of failure we had on the slate, one of the lowest scoring slates. And just real quickly, one other macro point too is I think if you're playing GPPs right, you have to accept there's going to be weeks where you're not going to win. I think some people feel like if they think about it the correct way, if they research hard enough, they can predict the future and they can win a GPP every week. But really, you're going to have 2 weeks out of 3 where you're kind of just dead in the water if you're playing correctly. But the goal is then to have a third week, kind of like this past week, where there's chaos and you're really benefiting and shooting to the top of the leaderboard as a result of that chaos.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Speaking of chaos, let's get to tonight's Bears Vikings game. The injury news. I mean, this game was going to be a mess regardless, but then we get this crazy injury news. David Montgomery is out, and the Bears like almost irresponsibly don't have like anything. I mean, they're like scraping off the street with Lamar Miller at running back. They also have Ryan Nall, #team preseason. They also have Artavis Pierce. Allen Robinson, we expect to play, but he is listed questionable. Irv Smith, star of 2009 of Week 9 cash games. Irv Smith is out, and Javon Wiggins is out too. So we have a really, really messy situation here. I think what we need to do is zoom out and talk a little bit about how we handle these slates where it's another game where if this was a main slate, I'm not sure we'd have very many plays, and which seems to always happen in Showdown for whatever reason. And then B, we also have this situation where we don't know exactly what's going to happen with Chicago running backs. So zoom out and talk to people how you're thinking about this slate.
Yeah, we've been killed on these Showdown slates with not having very clear-cut playing time scenarios. I mean, it feels like week after week, it's a weird situation with unreliable teams. So I think, first of all, when you're looking at projections, there's 2 ways projections can go wrong. One is, we have the projection inputs correct, but there's still going to be volatility. And if a guy just has a couple big plays, scores touchdowns, it's going to swing plus or minus the projection a little bit. And most people have a good handle on that volatility. The second type of volatility, though, is we don't know what inputs to even put in to get to the projection. And that's reflective of this slate tonight with Chicago at running back. And we saw this with the San Francisco 49ers slate at receiver, where Richie James ended up being a great play. I think we had Trent Taylor projected higher than him. And you can take more chances when the input volatility is really high, because you're not just talking about the normal volatility swing plus or minus projection. If we're completely wrong and Lamar Miller, plays 50% of the snaps, he's a lock jam smash play at $200. So you have some more room to take some chances on slates like this, just because it's unclear. I think the Minnesota stuff's a little clearer at tight end, where Rudolph we'd expect to play more, and Tyler Conklin will be a cheap backup. One other thing on the Minnesota tight end situation, I do wonder if Chad Beebe is third receiver, if they switch their sets up a little bit and play with a third receiver more, Beebe could get lost in the shuffle, because a lot of times people like to look at the direct tight end backup instead of looking at, kind of branching off at different ways it could affect other players.
Yeah, for sure. And listen, I mean, Minnesota, nobody wants to be on team established run more than Minnesota. Like in Mike Zimmer's optimal world, they are not throwing the ball very much in this game at all. But, we'll see if they can manage that. I actually think that this is actually a pretty good spot for Chicago's offense as a whole. And I actually think Chicago has a pretty good chance to win the game. I know they're an underdog here. I think they have a pretty reasonable chance to win the game, assuming Allen Robinson is active for this game. Let's talk about handling Dalvin Cook, because I think that's one of the stories of the slate. It's not often you get a player projected, 5 points more than any other player on the entire slate. Of course, he's very expensive. Of course, he's in a very, very difficult matchup. But man, I mean, you can make a case that Dalvin Cook actually matters. And I say that because when Alexander Madison has a chances, when Mike Boone has a chances, they have just failed miserably. Dalvin Cook just goes out there and roasts people for whatever reason. Small sample, of course, but Dalvin seems like just so much far and away better than everybody else. How do you handle this when one player is projecting so much higher than the rest and they're extremely expensive?
Yeah, it's difficult. And you mentioned Cook mattering. I mean, I saw a graph of rush yards over expectation, and Cook's is so high. And that's, accounting for kind of the size of the hole and different things like that. So it's not like any other running back would do that. But back to your question, how do I handle it? I'm tempted to play pretty heavy Dalvin Cook. I think there's a really strong chance on a slate like this he's going to be in your optimal lineup. I do think Draftkings did a good job pricing this slate a little bit tighter. Whenever we have our first run of ownership projections, which shout out to Cody Main, he does those. When we're over on salary, I know the slate's priced a little bit tighter, and we were over on salary. Our first run of ownership projections, we have since updated them. So that leaves some room to maybe not play Cook in the captain spot and get unique there. But I think it makes sense to have a lot of Cook and not to galaxy brain yourself into a fade that's unlikely to happen. I'd rather get unique elsewhere. The gap, I mean, you said 5 points. It's close to 7 points. I mean, it's wild. And the guys that are closest to him are, his quarterback and Kirk Cousins, who's, not really, you don't think would outscore him in a captain situation. So this is where I look to the receivers a lot. I think those are the types of players that go under owning captain at times, and particularly Cook's teammates and captain. If they just score in the air rather than on the ground, it's a very concentrated offense, and Thielen and Jefferson have a pretty high ceiling.
Yeah, I mean, Bears have been absolutely lights out against quarterbacks and wide receivers this season. Doesn't mean they're going to be lights out tonight, but I mean, it's been one of the worst possible matchups for opposing quarterbacks and wide receivers has been the Bears. Okay, let's go to the other side at running back, because I think that's where people are going to have a lot of questions. Bottom line is we don't know. Like Ryan Nall, Artavis Pierce, Lamar Miller. Yes, that Lamar Miller, you remember from the Texans days, who's been on the street. They signed the practice squad, called him up for this game. Ryan Nall, who was getting heavy work in the preseason in 2019 and doing, even in the preseason, it was obvious that like he was not going to break like a 10-yard run. It just like wasn't happening. But they like using Ryan Nall in the pass game, which I think is intriguing. And then they have Artavis Pierce, who knows how much they're going to use him. My lean to be my favorite is Ryan Nall, because he has a lot of experience in the system. He also plays well in the pass game. They've at least trusted him to be on the field some. However, he is the most expensive by a wide margin. And if you're looking at point per dollar, obviously Ryan Nall would be the worst play of the three. So what do you think about this very muddy Chicago Bears running back situation?
Yeah, it's really difficult to dissect. We'll be following the beat writers and updating our projections accordingly. My lean is Nall is definitely the safest. We know he's going to play. He's going to get the passing down work. The question is, how much rush work does he get? And right now we're sort of saying he's not going to get a lot of rush work. Let's spread that out to Lamar Miller, Artavis Pierce, and Cordell Patterson isn't listed here. But we are expecting him to actually right now lead the team in carries. I think he's a great play at 5,200. He can get there in a variety of ways. Probably going to be a little bit chalky because other people are on that. But Ryan Nall, Artavis Pierce, Lamar Miller have combined for 0 carries this season. So, I mean, we were talking about the Wild Wild West. 3 running backs with 0 combined carries. We're guessing. And I know there's some history with Lamar Miller and the offensive coordinator for the Chicago Bears. We'll see there. And you can tie this back to the Dalvin Cook thing with all these guys being so cheap and the slate itself being somewhat low scoring. That's even more reason to not get too cute with Dalvin Cook in your flex spot, because it doesn't project to be a high scoring slate. And even though it's priced tighter up top with some of those receivers, you have enough cap relief down low here, taking stabs at these running backs, especially if you think Lamar Miller, I mean, at $200, you're basically just hoping he's playing. If he's in the mix, even if he's third fiddle, he's playable at $200.
Yeah, I'm actually tempted. Well, I'll say this about Matt Nagy. When Matt Nagy has his way, it is very throw centric. He comes from Andy Reid coaching tree. Like Matt Nagy is not on team established to run. If they are losing, if it's a neutral situation, I think we'll see a lot of dropbacks, because the way you beat Minnesota, I mean, gosh, they have no good shower narrative call, Charlie. Yeah. They have no pass catcher. They have no defenders, Minnesota. I mean, they've been getting flamed through the air all season. So I think with no David Montgomery, we come out and see a really pass-centric approach out of Chicago. And if I was only building a few lineups, that is kind of the line that I would take. Hey, forget this running back nonsense. I think that, Bill Lazor, same thing. I mean, Bill Lazor comes from Philadelphia, and then I think we'll see a very pass heavy approach from the Bears.
So this is what I'm struggling with is I think logically that follows a ton, but I want to track the weather too. I mean, weather has been an issue in some of these games, and I know the total here has dropped a few points throughout the week. The wind sounds like it might be a factor. It's kind of on the cusp of where we think it matters. Either that 15 to 20 mile per hour cutoff is where we think it matters. If it's less than 15, it doesn't. But that sometimes screws with the pass run ratios. And that's where I kind of throw my hands up where, if the weather is an issue, I think they're going to be pass heavy for all the reasons you said, but if the weather's an issue, what do they do? So very difficult slate.
Well, I'll say this. I would, if you just said guns in my head, who's going to score more points tonight, Nick Foles or Kirk Cousins, I would say Nick Foles for sure. And I don't think that's what we have in projection, but that's just the way I feel about it from matchup and from schematic point of view. So yeah, I mean, Kirk Cousins in this spot could just absolutely melt down. I know we have the narrative that Kirk Cousins always fails on national TV. It's actually there is historical data on that. I mean, he's been bad on national TV, and so sample size is obviously small. But yeah, I know we have a 1 point gap. I would actually be betting on Nick Foles to outscore Cousins tonight at the quarterback spot, and so you can build lineups that follow through that. And I want to get to wide receiver now because one of I think the standout wide receiver plays for me at least would be Darnell Mooney, who has seen so many air yards, is in the air yards by low model. Again, seen so many targets, and whereas Anthony Miller needs them to go 3 wide a lot to get a lot of usage, and they've done that lately for Anthony Miller. It's not a lock. Darnell Mooney is locked in on the outside. Maybe Allen Robinson is more banged up than we think. I just think it sets up really well for Darnell Mooney to be able to possibly break the slate with one long play. He's had so many near misses this year, and yeah, part of that is Nick Foles isn't very good, but I feel like he's gonna have some chances tonight. So those are the kind of ways that I would be thinking about the lineups tonight. Maybe a big Nick Foles game, and if so, what happens with that?
Yeah, and Anthony Miller's role has been growing too. So I think both of those are appealing ways too. If everyone else is sort of stumbling and tripping over figuring out the Chicago running back situation, and then maybe the Galaxy brain thing is it doesn't matter because it ends up being these cheaper wide receiver plays. And I'm going to take a second look at the pass run ratio based on some of the things you have, maybe make Chicago a little pass heavier than we currently have them. I also think what's interesting in our base projections, even though we have, I know you guys can't see the detail, we have Adam Thielen for more volume than Justin Jefferson, but Justin Jefferson with a higher projection at lower ownership and at lower cost. And it's really the efficiency stuff for him has been absurd. And that's what's driving that. He's been one of the best down the field targets. Now, does the weather hurt him more than it hurts Jefferson or more than it hurts Thielen? That's possible. But right now, if you were to just purely look at the data, you'd say, okay, higher projection, lower cost, lower ownership. That's the better play at wide receiver for Minnesota.
Yeah, I think it's at least possible that Allen Robinson's ownership would be held in check just by the Q tag next to his name. Obviously think that he is one of the best plays on the slate. Anything else at wide receiver we should mention? You mentioned Chad Beebe already. I agree with you that there's at least a chance if they don't like Tyler Conklin that much, that they go more 3 wide, especially if they get down in this game and Chad Beebe comes into play as the clear-cut number 3 wide receiver. Anything else you think at wide receiver? Cordell Patterson is listed at wide receiver as well. Not that it matters on Showdown, but yeah.
Yeah, for the D-Gens playing 150 lineups in the lottos, Riley Ridley got some playing time with Wims out again this week. I mean, that's like your punt play. On this slate, I don't know if it matters because you can play the punt running backs, but anybody who can see targets sometimes is in your player pool in MME, and he had 2 targets last week.
Yep. Okay. Tight end is interesting because Jimmy Graham has been productive, man. And despite the age model, he's been productive. However, it's been so touchdown driven. That said, he clearly has a major red zone role. So how do you account for these guys who are touchdown dependent? But that said, it's very clear that Chicago scheming Jimmy Graham plays in the red zone. He's expensive, but he's also has to be one of the best bets on the slate for a touchdown.
Yeah, I mean, those guys just naturally come with more volatility than other guys because the touchdown is 6 points and it's going to swing and it makes up a large percentage of their projection. And Graham is someone I gave kind of crap to early in the season because his efficiency was really bad. He just seemed like he was flukishly catching touchdowns, but the usage in the red zone has followed. So I've taken a little bit of an L on Jimmy Graham. And the other thing of note here with the Chicago tight ends, Cole Kmet missed 2 practices this week. He's listed as questionable, which is disappointing because last week we actually saw him. I feel like a lot of weeks people have said Cole Kmet's role is growing, and I'm like, not really. He just had a couple targets you happen to see on TV. But last week it actually did happen where he played 47% of snaps, and Demetrius Harris dropped all the way to 8% of snaps. So if he's active, you could take a bet on that role continuing to expand for him. If he's not, Demetrius Harris is actually a pretty reasonable play at $200.
Yeah. Okay. Irv Smith is out. I think Kyle Rudolph's role is pretty stable, but they have used Irv Smith in the red zone plenty. I'm not sure if that goes to Tyler Conklin or Kyle Rudolph, but it's at least worth mentioning that Kyle Rudolph is very cheap and Irv Smith is out. Like there's no doubt, obviously, from a point per dollar perspective, Kyle Rudolph is a better play than Jimmy Graham. What do you think about the Minnesota tight ends? And do you think we can even, I don't know, Conklin seems really thin to me, even at 600.
Yeah, Conklin's the guy I'm most worried about. I could see him playing a lot of snaps and not seeing much action. And we've already hit on some other guys I think I'd rather take chances on. And again, people look to the direct backup sometimes in these situational showdown slates, which could drive that Conklin ownership higher than it should be. If he was a single digit guy, I think it'd be a great play, but we have him projected 11%. I could see it getting up to maybe even 15.
Okay, I had some season-long streaming defense spots where I said there's a little bit of weather. It's Kirk Cousins in prime time. Bears have a good pass rush. Like I think the Bears may have actually been in play. Bears defense may have actually been in play in a full slate here, and they come in very cheap. I believe they are 3,200, and they're a little bit more expensive than the Vikings. Obviously, Vikings projection comes in bigger with Nick Foles struggling so badly. But talk about how these defensive projections come into play and how you think you'll handle them tonight.
Yeah, so the defenses are projected pretty reasonably tonight. I mean, we had some slates where there were chalk defenses at 7K, and we're like, no, don't do it. But this slate, you can see all the guys that are cheaper than the defenses project for less points, and pretty meaningfully so. So I think they're in play tonight. Just think through your game scripts. We have the Vikings D projected better. One, the Nick Foles stuff, he hasn't been that great, and two, we have Chicago passing more than Minnesota, which actually that creates more chances for fantasy points. And then thirdly, the team total on Chicago is lower than the team total on Minnesota. So those three things work together. But as you noted with Kirk Cousins, I mean, no one's ever surprised if he throws a pick six. So I think both are in play more than usual slates.
It's all game script dependent, right? In situations where Kirk Cousins is forced to drop back 35 times, Chicago defense is clearly a way better play. It's just that's not what the line is expecting, and that's why the projections come in this way. But I, as someone who thinks Chicago has a really good chance to win this game, I would prefer Chicago's defense here. And again, they are very, very cheap. I think they're definitely in play. Kickers, going to be weather, not going to be a high-scoring game. I think the defenses are probably better plays than kickers tonight, but what do you think about that?
I think for GPPs, the defenses are better plays. The base projection you'll see leans towards the kickers a little bit, but the upside, if you get a pick six or something on the defenses, or just a game where they're racking up a lot of sacks and it could be low scoring, I prefer them in GPP. I think the tail outcomes are a little bit higher, and there is downside if the weather is an issue for the kickers that might even limit them. We've docked them each about half a point right now based on the weather. Probably won't do much more than that, but I do feel like there's a little bit more downside than upside to the kickers.
By the way, it came to me while we were talking about tight ends. I feel like vindicated that punting at tight end on DraftKings, and this is not Showdown, but on main slates, even if you are flirting with zeros, is way better than paying 4,500 for these guys. And with their max outcome is like, I mean, I think the most fantasy points that tight end scored on yesterday's main slate was like 13 with Rob Gronkowski. And so I understand Kelce wasn't on the slate. I understand Waller had a 55-yard touchdown or whatever called back. I understand Kittle is hurt. But man, like I'm so sick of paying 4,500 for these total dust balls at tight end. Have you adjusted your opinion at all about punting a tight end on main slates?
I mostly just wanted to give you trouble that your vindication comes at the expense of Rob Gronkowski being the T1 on the slate.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point. He's the tight end.
Bittersweet. Bittersweet for you. No, it's been nuts. I mean, do not play a chalk tight end. If he beats you, he beats you. Maybe a slate where Kelsey's underpriced, whatever. But it was Dallas Goedert yesterday. We had a Hunter Henry week. Which,
like Johnny Smith at like 4,100 with chalk.
Oh, yeah. Don't play the chalk tight end. It's not worth. And it's weird because I keep checking our projections. I feel like we're maybe over projecting the tight end position, and it's starting. I think on our main slate projections, we had very few positive values last week, so I think we're starting to adjust to that. But it's strange. The tight end performances have been egregious this year.
All right. Anyways, back to Showdown. We'll do some flag plants and then we'll get out of here. You and Dink were on fire with the flag plants. I believe they were like DeAndre Swift and Claypool and Gibson or something insane like that.
Mostly Dink. I had Michael Thomas. So.
Oh, dude. That was just, God. Okay.
Dink.
Anyways,
though.
This is a forward-thinking show. I will go first. Shout out to me. And I already alluded to it, but I think that this is a really good spot for Darnell Mooney. Expect a pass-centric approach from the Bears tonight. Expect Darnell Mooney to be the one with the safer role than Anthony Miller, and expect Darnell Mooney to get at least 2 or 3 of those long shots. Has not converted any of them yet, but man, if they click on this slate where it's going to be low scoring, it could just take 1 or 2. So yeah, I like Allen Robinson. I think that Anthony Miller is fine, but I think from an ownership price upside perspective, Mooney would be my favorite.
Yeah, I'm struggling with the flag plant here. You've been killing me on these flag plants on the showdown slates. I'll take, I don't want to say the opposite side because I think both could actually hit together, but I like the Minnesota defense a lot as being under owned tonight. If we think Chicago's going to throw more, they just might have issues. Allen Robinson's banged up. And I honestly think Minnesota D and Mooney can both get there. I mean, you have to take someone on the Chicago side. And if you're playing a defense, it often makes sense that the person you want coming back on a defense is a pass catcher who can get there, racking up catches, maybe 100-yard bonus, and doesn't need the touchdowns to hit their ceiling. So my defense might look leveraged against your flag plant, Adam, but I think they actually sync together somewhat reasonably well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, a pick 6 for the Vikings defense is great for Mooney. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I mean, that's like the best possible outcome. So, yeah, I always try to think in terms of pick 6s. If you're going for like the top of these lottos, like pick 6 is good for Mooney and full stuff. Okay. Appreciate all you guys listening. Would appreciate it even more if you guys hit the subscribe button. If you hit that notification bell, you'll know when we go live on YouTube, and we'll keep trying to bring you guys these extra bits of content, extra free stuff. If you're interested in signing up for the full Establish the Run experience, head to the site right now. We have some deals up. Okay. For Leone, for producer Leone, I am Adam. Good luck on tonight's showdown slate.